Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, we have Michael King, better known as Mike, founder and CEO of iPullRank. iPullRank is a digital marketing agency that implements a one-of-a-kind blend of market segmentation, content strategy, SEO, generative AI, and even engineering skills to help create powerful marketing campaigns to grow businesses like SAP, American Express, Nordstrom, Etsy, and Adidas. Mike's the author of a soon-to-be-released book, The Science of SEO, which I can't wait to read. And he's been recognized by USA Today as one of the top 10 influencers in 2022 and was named one of the top marketing influencers to follow by LinkedIn in 2021. He's a musician and he's one heck of a dresser. How are you today, Mike?
I'm fantastic. Excited to be here.
And we're doing remote location from San Diego, which is pretty cool. I know typically you're in New York. How do you like East Coast versus West Coast?
You know what? I'm going to be completely honest with you. The West Coast is lazy compared to us on the East Coast. You know, everything is so easy and chill. And, you know, it seems like everything is wellness first, which is great because it's just like I get out of New York and, you know, the wave of stress is just gone because everything here is like, how can you feel better?
Yeah, I feel like when you're walking down the street in Manhattan, no one's really asking you that. So let's start off with where you went to school and what you studied.
Yeah, I went to Howard University in DC, which has been getting a lot more visibility as of late with Kamala Harris being an alumnus. And I studied systems and computer science.
When you look back at that experience, I know it's a long time ago, but are there any experiences specifically inside or outside the classroom that were impactful in directing your path?
So I feel like you just nicely called me old there. But yeah. Yeah, I think it was really more outside of the classroom because for me, you know, I've been coding since I was 12. And what I learned in class was a lot of math, which was great. But as far as like what we were learning, it was like C++, which I already knew, and then Java, which I didn't know, but was really similar to C++. So I didn't really feel very challenged by computer science. And so I learned a lot more about just life, frankly, on campus and how to connect with people. And I spent more time like doing music related stuff there. And I just felt like, okay, this is where I want to take my life. And then ultimately my path through music is what got me to SEO. You know, obviously I learned academic things, of course, but the things that like really impacted my life that were new were more like social emotional skills that I picked up.
So in the year 2024, if someone were to come to you and said, you know, should I go to college? It sounds like there's a lot of ways that I can learn things outside of it. What's the advice that you generally give?
College is super valuable, but it's not a requirement for everyone, right? Like if you don't know what you want to do or how to do it, then of course go to college because not only will they give you those skills, but you also build your network in a variety of ways by going to school. And obviously, like depending on where you go to school, that network may be more inherently valuable as well. So there's definitely a reason to go to college, but if you're someone who's self-motivated, a self-starter and like autodidactic, like they can learn themselves or whatever, then you don't necessarily need it because it's more about like what you can actually do than where you learned it. You know, I meet a lot of people as we interview folks to come on board at iPullRank, and like you'll have these people that are very well decorated. They went to these great schools. They have master's degrees. When you sit them down to do something, they have no idea what to do. Whereas we'll also have people who like, you know, might be college dropouts or never went to college or just took some course or whatever, and they know what to do. So for me, I really just look for people that can actually do things. And sometimes they come in the form of college graduates. Sometimes they don't. I'm not a college graduate, you know, so like I went, but I didn't finish. And so that to me is not a requirement to be good at something because obviously I've seen firsthand that you can be good at things without graduating college.
So Mike, how would you define a mentor?
So I think that there are both implicit mentors and explicit mentors, right? So the explicit mentor is what you think of or what most people think of when they think mentors, like someone who sits you down and says like, hey, you're not thinking big enough or you're doing this wrong or you should think about this in this way or that way or whatever. And then there are the implicit mentors, people that you kind of just like look up to and you're like, okay, they're doing this thing this way. Well, maybe I should think about this thing another way. And so you're learning by watching what they do. And you may or may not have interactions with them directly, but you are changing how you are interacting in the world based on information that you're gleaning from that person.
And it sounds like to be a well-rounded individual, it's important to have both.
I mean, it could be. I've really landed on that because I have not had a lot of explicit mentors. And so when I think about, where my improvements come from, it's a lot of like reading, self-evaluation, looking at, the people that I respect and saying like, hey, it looks like they learned something here. Perhaps I can reconsider what I'm doing. And so, yeah, I think you can get it either way, like through a combination, or you can get it from one or the others.
So let's talk about one of your explicit mentors, Tony Effick. How has he been influential to your life?
Tony's probably like one of the only people to sit me down and be like, look, you need to think bigger about what you're doing, right? So like my path into SEO, and it's probably similar to, a lot of people's, is that you kind of come in, you have no idea what you're doing, you figure it out. And then you're like, cool, this is how SEO works. This is what I'm doing. You make small adjustments as you go based on things that you learn. But, I was literally your typical like technical content linking SEO. And then I worked at a big ad agency, which was in the Publicis network. And, everything around me is all about like creative and strategy and, these sorts of things that I fit into and I know enough about, but I wasn't thinking big picture. And so Tony was like, nah, here's how search fits into the big picture of a strategy. And here's how you do big picture strategic thinking. And so he helped me really level up. And he was one of the sources of why I started doing all the persona-based stuff, because it was a good way for me to fit into the marketing mix in the way that like a CMO thinks about it, in the way that other teams are thinking about it. So what he taught me was how to be an actual strategist. And, once I got the bug from that, I was like, wait, like I can now see the matrix and I know where all this stuff fits into it. And then I could add on to my skill set in a way that made, bigger picture sense. And so it really allowed me to figure out like, okay, here's how everything I can do plays together. Because I've been building websites since like 1995. But when you're an SEO, they're just like, cool, do the meta tags. And then you're having these conversations with the actual like people who have developer in their title who don't want to listen to you because they're like, you're the meta tag guy. But then when you come in and you have like a big picture discussion and you can say, here's how all these pieces fit together, not just from a strategic perspective, but you can break things down from a tactical perspective, you quickly get a lot of buy-in from a lot of people at the higher levels. And then you can actually make your ideas come to life. So Tony was really instrumental in helping me understand that big picture so I can play in the bigger ocean of strategy than just like sit at the little kids table for SEO.
Do you still keep in touch with Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tony still lives in Brooklyn. He's at Google now. He runs something really important at YouTube or whatever. And we'll catch up here and there. He has a bunch of kids. I have a bunch of kids. I have 2 kids, not a bunch of kids. And we always talk about like, hey, let's get the kids together. I was there for his birthday a couple years. So Tony is like still someone that's in my orbit. And when things are not going well, I'll send a text like, hey, Tony, like, what do you think I should do here? So it's been a super valuable relationship to me. And, I've learned so much from him, both explicitly and implicitly.
It's wonderful that you have someone like that when you really, really need it, you can send him a text. And that's important. So let's talk about some of the implicit mentors, people around you that you look up to and have influenced you.
Rand Fishkin has done so much for me, both explicitly and implicitly. He's always someone I can reach out to when things, again, aren't going well. And he can give me some feedback and whatever. I remember one time I was going to do a whiteboard Friday at Moz, and I had no idea what to talk about. And I sat down with Rand for like 30 seconds. And he stares into space for a couple seconds, and then he's like, you should talk about this. And it was like the perfect idea, right? So it's kind of like indicative of my experiences with Rand. A lot of times I'll have no idea or some idea, and he'll just help me quickly refine things on how to do it. Or as another example with the Google leak, he came to my house and I was just like, yo, things aren't going well right now. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, we're hanging on by a thread. And, that's not something I would typically be vulnerable with people to say. Like, I would just, power through it. And then a few weeks later, he's like, hey, I got these leaked documents. I think you can help me, parse through them. And it's become like the single biggest opportunity in my career. It's led to some of the biggest deals I've ever closed. So that's what I mean. Like, he's looked out for me in ways that he didn't have to do. Right. And that's just him. Like, I don't think it's anything specifically special about me. It's just how he is in the world. He's always happy to help. So Rand has done a lot of stuff like that for me. Another implicit mentor I would say would be Will Reynolds, right? Like when I, went to my first SEO conference, which was MozCon, I was just like looking around like, wow, this is so cool. Like all these like thought leaders, they have all these cool ideas. They're so clever. But nothing in me crossed my mind that made me think like, oh, I can do this too. Until I saw Will Reynolds get on stage and I was like, oh, they let Black people do this. Okay. And so there's been a lot of things that, I've watched Will Reynolds do. And it's been like, okay, that's the way you're supposed to do this, right? Like he's very vocal about, kind of his like altruism and how he runs his companies and just the way he is in the world. And again, you look at that and you're like, okay, this is a paragon of how this is meant to be done. And then you take away the bits and pieces that resonate with you, and then you create your own thing. So, I would look at him as someone like that as well. And then, there's just a lot of people in business that like you take little tidbits from where you're like, oh, this guy's doing, or this woman is doing something that's really interesting. Perhaps I should try that. So I take a lot of inspiration from a lot of places, from people that I know, I don't know. And then I use that to determine like, okay, here's what I want to do and here's who I want to be in the world.
So you mentioned Will being important because he kind of showed you what was possible. Do you feel like you're that as well now for young African-American men to look up, oh, wow, look at this successful person. I can accomplish this as well.
Yeah, a lot of people reach out to me, and this is why representation matters. Like I was literally sitting in this room watching all these people being like, oh yeah, this is not for me. And that's not something that I typically do, like in life in general, just from all the experiences that I've had and so on. But in that situation, I felt that way. So many people have reached out to me, not just, Black people, but also, people of color in general, reached out to me and they say like, hey, I love to see you doing what you do in the authentic way that you do it. Because sometimes it's not just about like, what you look like, how you present or whatever. It's also just the way you are in the world. Like I'm not somebody who code switches. I'm not somebody who, acts differently in these environments. And for some people that makes them uncomfortable. But for me, I'm like, I'm here. This is who I am. Like I'm not changing who I am just because, this is how everyone else acts. And so I get a lot of people that reach out to me for that. And they're like, I really appreciate that you're not acting differently in this world. But yeah, also, Black people reach out to me as well. And they're like, wow, you're such an inspiration or whatever. And I appreciate that. And I don't take that for granted at all. Like I understand the gravity of my position and what I do. And I always look to pay that forward wherever I can. And so when people reach out to me and they're like, hey, I'm trying to figure this out, I always try to make time to be like, hey, here's what I've done. Here's what's worked for me. It may not work for you, but let's talk through it. I'm happy to do that sort of stuff because you never know what impact you're going to have on that next person and so on and so forth. And, I just want to do my best to make the spaces I'm in better for people like me who also want to be in those spaces.
It's so amazing, so powerful. I know at Brighton SEO already last year, one of my employees was with me and I was so excited that I could introduce him to you because it's like, this is someone, has potentially walked the same path as you and you're someone to look up and look how successful he is. And it was just nice, right? Nice to be able to create that connection. It was just very inspiring for me.
Yeah. Again, like I feel like it's my duty to do that because I don't want anyone to feel the way that I felt in that room where I was like, this is not for me, because who's to say it's not for me? It's for whoever can do it. And, I mean, I think the things that I've shared with the SEO community, imagine if I hadn't had that moment watching Will Reynolds and I didn't share any of that. Like I think that would have been a huge disservice. And I'm sure there have been people in the past who are even better than the things that I've done who have felt that way and not felt like they could be included here. And we've missed out on the things that they had to contribute. So yeah, I think it's really important for me to keep doing that work.
And it's interesting. You make me think about like the concept of representation. I know Rand posted something about it recently, but like why it's so important at a conference. But it's funny. It's just that point. I've never really thought about it, but just to have a mix of people so that everyone in the crowd has someone that they can look up to and say, that could be me. It's so powerful. You don't really think about that, right?
Yeah. And I think I might actually be underselling how impactful that was for me to see Will. Like literally while he was speaking, I pitched for SMX East and then I got it. And then that created all of this for me. So, for someone to be able to see themselves on the stage is so powerful.
All right. So now let's talk about your mentorship style. So obviously you've spoken now how you mentor basically anyone who wants to come to you, right? But I mean, let's talk about employees and your colleagues at iPullRank. How do you mentor them?
I don't know if I'm the best at this, to be honest, but here's my approach. When we interview people, one of the key outputs from the interview, once you've made it through, is that we build out a coaching plan. Here's what we need this role to do. Here's what you want to accomplish. Here's what you want to go. Okay, cool. Here's our plan to close those gaps. And then I effectively manage against that plan, right? Like we come up with a series of OKRs collectively. And when I say collectively, they put together the first draft and then we'll edit it together and say, okay, well, you've got all these things, but we also need this. And then we have an action plan based on that. So what are the things you want to accomplish? What are the things you need to learn? Where do you need more experience? It needs to be more comfortable, confident, and effective. That's where we're building our plan off of. And then from there, I do, bi-weekly one-on-ones where we're discussing those items, but we're also discussing, how are you doing? How's your life going? How are you aligning with our values as a company? And our value set is PROUD, which stands for proactive, reliable, outstanding, useful, and dedicated. And we talk through like, okay, well, where did you not exemplify those things as well? So we can figure out like, how can we continuously improve? I'm more like, let's do the big picture plan and then let's work on that over time so that we can get you to where you need to go and also where I need you to go so that we can do better work. So I don't know if that's the best approach, but I like structured approaches so that we're all clear on what it is that we're doing and also leave space for variance as required as well. But that's the way I do it.
I love it. And I think one of the unique things, which just from talking to people, often you have a need in a company, you hire someone to fill that hole, right? And it's like, okay, these are things we need from you. Go ahead, right? But you're actually saying, no, I'm starting with what you want, right? With what you need to accomplish. And then let's see how that fits into what our goals and what our plans are. And that way you keep the person motivated, but also fulfill what the company needs. I don't think that everyone approaches it that way. Kudos to you.
Yeah. I mean, that was just the way that made sense to me. Here's the thing, like perhaps it's a function of me never staying anywhere long enough. But in the places that I worked, I don't think there was enough of a like performance and mentoring culture. Even with Tony was only my manager for like 6 months and then he moved on to another agency. So there wasn't really enough of a space for me to see like, what's the long-term approach to performance management and mentorship look like? So I was just like, well, what would I want? And then also I've read all the books, like Work Rules and things like that, like all the books. And I was like, cool, let me take pieces from this and then put together an approach that makes sense to me. So that's how I landed on it.
I know that one of my colleagues is going to be really excited that we mentioned the word OKR in this episode. So kudos to you, Mike. Let's transition over to SEO. My question to you, we've got the Google leaks from a couple of months ago. And a lot of it to me feels like it's pointing towards optimizing for the traditional 10, 11 links on Google. Now we also have the AI overviews that are coming in. And the question is, man, how do I optimize for those, right? So we'll get into it more detail, but do you feel like these are are these competing? Are they really connected? And I know it's kind of deep, but I'd love to know your opinion.
Yeah, they're not competing at all. They just operate differently, right? So like when you're trying to optimize for standard organic search or standard web search or whatever you want to call it, it's more about how relevant is the entirety of the page to that query. And then of course you've got, the authority metrics. Do you have the links? And then another big component, which has been reinforced by the leak and also the DOJ antitrust trial testimony, is that the user behavior and how they interact with your page matters a whole lot. Are you driving clicks? Are people staying on your site after they've clicked through? So on and so forth. But as far as that as it compares to AI overviews, AI overviews are driven by what's called retrieval augmented generation, which is a paradigm where you're combining a large language model with a search engine. And so the way that works is that it breaks your pages down into chunks, and then it looks for the most relevant chunk to the keyword and also the prompt that they're using in the background. So really what that's about is like, where's the most relevant paragraph or most relevant sentence to what the user is looking for? So I think of that as kind of like a micro optimization, whereas for web search, it's more of like a macro optimization for the page. So they don't necessarily conflict with each other. It's just that doing it for AI overviews is going to be way more granular than what you're doing for the standard search. And then the other thing with AI overviews is that it also uses the structured data heavily. So not just like the individual structured data that you have on your page, but also the structured data that Google is building across the web and about the world and so on. There are going to be instances where it's just a fact that Google has seen across the web and corroborated, and you can't necessarily change it because that fact is like all across the web and you can't just change it on your site. But when they're using content that is only found on a handful of sites, then you have that opportunity to change what that answer is going to be and appear in those citations to the AI overviews.
Awesome. That's a great explanation. Thank you. Talking about the Google leak, I don't want to spend too much time, but just a question. You and I and lots of other people, we've made a lot of money or we've make money. It's our livelihood is through this thing called Google. And so it's kind of like this love-hate relationship where it's like, man, if Google were to disappear today, it really would affect us, right? But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that suddenly everything they do is correct. Was there a part of you getting involved in this, or just in general, when you maybe do call out like the big brothers like Google, is there a part where it's like, I'm kind of like hitting the hand that feeds me? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an aspect of that. And even with the DOJ trial, them deciding that it's monopoly and there's like considerations that they may break up Google and so on. Everything I see them talk about, I'm like, yes, I do want Google to be held accountable, but I don't want you to do any of the things that y'all are considering. Like, I don't want it to be them getting rid of Chrome. I don't want it to be them getting rid of Android. I don't want it to be them having to give up all their data, their query logs and so on, to like other search engines and so on. I just want them to make a better search experience, because even during that trial, they talk about how like, yeah, Google is the best. It is a marvel of human technology. And so, yes, it is a love-hate relationship because, as a user, I'm like, wow, I remember what search engines were like before this. Like Alta Vista was trash. Lycos was trash. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is remarkable. As a computer scientist, this is remarkable. But at the same time, you got to recognize, like, when they make these changes, what is that doing to these small businesses? It's crushing these businesses. So to your point, anything that they do to change Google is going to have dramatic second order effects, right? Like if search is no longer as viable, yes, that's going to send a shockwave across the SEO agency, which is already, or industry, which is already an underpaid industry, right? Like we are responsible for the biggest portion of traffic from any channels, but we are the channel that costs the least. It's ridiculous, right? So yes, it is biting the hand that feeds, because at the same time, I am exposing how Google actually works, which is going to make the job even more difficult for Google. But at the same time, I come at this not only just as someone who's trying to make money off of Google, but someone with a very intense curiosity on how information retrieval works. and these advancements that Google has made that have changed the science of how search works. So of course I want to know how it works. And by design, Google has to not tell me how it works. And I'm smart enough to figure out how it works. So of course I'm going to share that because it enriches me, of course, for my business, but it also satisfies this deep curiosity that I have about this technology and, allows me to contribute in ways that then I get back even more information from other people in this space who are also just researching this from a, slightly different angle. So it's biting the hand that feeds, but it's also like I have to do it.
Another interesting conclusion from the leak, and which is not a direct conclusion in a way, was that we should focus on customers and not the leak. Do you want to talk more about that? What pushed you to kind of come to that conclusion?
When you think about impacting the things that Google is measuring at scale, it's not by doing these little hacks. It's by making something that people actually want and promoting it, right? Because when you think about it, again, I look at this as user experience, relevance, and authority. Well, when we say things like be a brand, which no one wants to hear because it's such an ambiguous idea, brands are going to be the ones that are going to have the better user experience because people remember these brands and they're like, oh yeah, I searched for something, a brand I know has showed up. I am of course going to click on that more than a brand I don't know. And brands have the money and the wherewithal to invest in relevance, making robust, comprehensive pieces of content and experiences that are beyond just one piece of content. And then brands are also going to be able to capture that authority because, again, if you see a brand you recognize, you have a higher likelihood of linking to that brand. So, at the end of the day, what you need to do is be a brand in order to create this stuff at scale. Sure, you can go buy a bunch of links. So you have the same number of links, but you're not going to have the same quality of links because we've just learned how quality is measured. It's based on pages that get more traffic and rank for things. Where you're building your links from are not going to be sites that get a bunch of traffic or rank for things. So a brand is going to beat you there. A brand is going to beat you in user metrics because, again, a brand is going to be more attractive to people. Sure, you can fake that by getting a whole bunch of people to click your things, but it's going to be people from random countries in the middle of nowhere. And it's not going to have the same signal as a user logged into Chrome in the United States or wherever location you're trying to rank for. So it's going to be a diluted signal anyway. So again, the focus needs to be on well, how do I do this stuff at scale? And it's going to be by actually building a brand that people remember and want to read content from.
So I used to pitch that SEO was David and Goliath. It was the leveling field that allowed the David to win. So how do we, based on what you just said, what does a small, medium-sized business do? Feels like it's difficult.
Well, I think that part hasn't changed because when you're a small business, you start from the long tail. You use that as the opportunity to drive the traffic. You build up your branded terms, so more people are coming to you that way. And then over time, you're going to have the brand signals, the authority, and the relevance to be more competitive. It's just not a situation where you can launch a new website today and then go compete with Amazon. That's just not realistic. That's how things used to work when Google was far less sophisticated. And then also SEO was far less sophisticated. But we're at a point where Google is trying to replicate the real world experience with these brands. And so you have to build a brand. That's not saying that you can't drive traffic and make revenue from search. You can. You just have to be really strategic about the keywords that you're going after. And it's going to be just a bigger collection of those lower search volume, longer tail keywords. And that's also the benefit of AI is that you can expect the long tail traffic is going to get even bigger because Google can handle longer queries now as a function of generative AI. Previously, the limitation on how long a query could be was 32 words. Now, I think they can, expand further than that because of the fact that they're able to understand that longer queries and more in depth. And so as a result of that, the long tail is going to be a bigger opportunity than it was before. And it's going to be easier for these smaller brands to compete there because, big brands may not have content for those super long tail queries. And so you can build a business there. Plenty of businesses have done it by making really bad content, right? Like if you look at every e-commerce site, they have, or not every, but a lot of e-commerce sites, they have those product listing pages that are every permutation of every query that people are searching for based on internal search. They throw some content on the bottom and it works really well. Well, how about you make the good content for those queries and then you drive the traffic that way? So yeah, you can still be David versus Goliath, just not on a keyword like TV, right? It's got to be like, what's the best TV for traveling in a car with 3 kids? Like that's the query where you need to win.
Awesome. Thank you for giving hope. How far are we from the SERP changing and just having like an AI overview? What do you think?
I think Google does want to go there to some degree. I think how far we are is going to be a function of, well, how can they monetize that, right? Like there was a demo, it didn't get a ton of views, but it was a demo when they were launching all the Gemini stuff where they had these like bespoke UIs where based on what your search was, they built a UI in real time for what those results would be like and how they would present them. And it was all based on generative AI and your query. And I think that's a really interesting way to do things because it really limits it to a series of options, but only the series of options that align with your intent and what you're ultimately looking to do. So I think that, yes, Google does want to get to this space where, it's like the Star Trek computer. You just get precisely what you need and nothing else. But I don't know that that's going to be monetizable in the way that Google's been printing money for the last 25 years.
And that's the hardest part. So the question is, will there be a competitor who comes and figures it out and then Google goes away? But it's difficult to, who knows?
Yeah, I don't think that's realistic in the short term because, what Google has is 25 years of data to indicate what we want to see. And I think from using other search engines, you perform a search and you're like, this is like 70% there. That other 30% is what makes Google so sticky for people. And I don't think that Search GPT is going to be the answer until they have enough data. But the reality is that Google search usage to this day is 100x higher than ChatGPT usage. And, when I last measured this, 40% of users go from ChatGPT back to Google because generative AI is inherently a broken product where there's a lot of hallucination. And so a lot of users still want to verify their information. So I don't think that Search GPT is going to be the answer in the short term. And I think that the other aspect of it is that Google doesn't have the same costs that these generative AI companies have because Google makes their own chips, whereas everyone else is beholden to NVIDIA and NVIDIA can't make enough fast enough. So people are going to run out of money faster than Google does. And Google's going to have plenty of time to look around and see all these other products, take the best components and then build a better version. And then the last component of it is that Gemini is baked into several multi-billion user products, Gmail, Docs, so on and so forth. So no matter what, you are using Google's generative AI. And Google's just going to get better. And then unless ChatGPT does something dramatically better, which they could, I don't think that they're going to beat Google at this game.
So at the end of 2024, moving into 2025, are there any traditional SEO tactics or SEO work that you feel people should stop doing or maybe focus less on?
Yeah, the volume game. And I say this understanding that the volume game is, a large part of my monthly recurring revenue. But people really need to focus on quality in the content that they're creating and then quality in the links that they're building. So when I say quality, again, I mentioned it a bit before, like Google is giving more value to links that drive traffic, links from pages that drive traffic and pages that are ranking well. And so you need to focus more on getting your links from there. And, you don't necessarily need 1,000 of them to perform. Whereas right now, most people are like, okay, well, that site has 100 links from DA40s. I'm going to get 105 links from DA46s or something like that. And you don't have to do that. Like the noise on the web that's creating is exactly what Google doesn't want, right? And then Google is also crawling less, indexing less. So you need to focus on making content that's actually great, that they do want to crawl and do want to index, rather than just spinning up a million pages and being like, well, if each of these pages gets 2 visits a month, we're printing money.
All right. So time for our lightning round. So let's jump in a little bit into the world of Mike King, the musician, the rapper. Who are your top 3 musical influencers or influences, and why?
Some of your viewers may not have the same context for rap as me, but I'm going to list them anyway. Ghostface Killer, who is from the Wu-Tang Clan. Method Man, who's also from the Wu-Tang Clan. And a rapper by the name of Pharaoh Monch. So Method Man was the person that made me want to rap. Like, I heard his first album and I was like, yo, I want to try that. And, over time, you just get better at it. And then Ghostface, I mean, I think his like style, not just as a rapper, but just as he like presents, he's just so cool and so interesting and, so visually compelling in how he, tells his stories in music. And also just like the way he dresses and things like that. Like, those have always had big influences on me. And then Pharaoh Monch is just the best rapper there is, right? Like, stylistically, lyrically, and so on. So many of the people that I was directly influenced by within the underground hip hop scene in New York, they were influenced by Pharaoh Monch. And then when you go back to the source and you're just like, oh, wow, this guy is so incredible and has been so incredible for so long. So much of how I rap is, like a direct descendant of how he raps. So yeah, those 3 guys definitely changed my life as it relates to hip hop.
Lovely. And I live in Houston, Texas. We've got a couple of decent rappers that come from our town.
Sure.
Any thoughts on H-Town rap?
Man, I love UGK. Obviously, like, they're fantastic. There's this guy named K Reno from out in Houston, and he was an incredible lyricist. I mean, I love rap from everywhere, man. Like, and there's nuances of how people do things in every region, even overseas, that you're like, yo, that's dope. Like, I really like, the regional sound or whatever. So yeah, those are the 2 groups that like come to mind for me from Houston. But obviously there's, Paul Wall and all those other guys too that have their own flavor and stuff. But yeah, I love rap from everywhere.
So, Mike, can you share with our listeners when and how they can get their hands on or stay in the loop about your upcoming book?
Yeah, just follow me on all the things at iPullRank. And, I post updates here and there. I believe it's for pre-order on like Target and Amazon and all that. But, when it comes out, we're going to make a lot of noise with this book. So you don't have to worry.
Know.
Yeah,
exactly. Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time today. This was really, really awesome. Thank you for being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Danny.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.